This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. In Connecticut, there are LGBTQ community centers in New Haven, Norwalk, and most recently, Bridgeport. There have also been recent efforts to launch a queer hub in West Hartford. These spaces are important for community safety, resources, and even are associated with reduced suicide risk among LGBTQ youth. And that's according to the Trevor Project, which is a nonprofit focused on suicide prevention efforts among that demographic. Connecticut Public reported on the New Haven Pride Center's move to a larger location in January. They say this will allow them to offer more community resources. Coming up, we hear from Juancarlos Soto, who's the executive director of the New Haven Pride Center, and we'll also hear from a researcher who has measured the importance of these community hubs and the resources they offer. Do you want to see a Pride Center where you live? You can join the conversation and let us know, 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR, or leave us a comment on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. But first, to give us the very latest on the legislative efforts to protect and restrict LGBTQ rights in the country is Orion Rummler, who's an LGBTQ plus reporter for The 19th, which is an independent nonprofit newsroom reporting on gender, politics, and policy. Orion, welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much, Catherine. It's great to be here.
And so before we get to that bigger and broader picture of what's going on, you reported on Tuesday's federal district court ruling striking down Florida's bans on gender-affirming care. Can you tell us about this and why that decision was so significant?
Thank you. Yeah, so Florida can no longer enforce its ban on transgender youth receiving gender-affirming care or its restrictions against adults accessing gender-affirming care. And gender-affirming care refers to gender transition care, which can include getting hormone replacement therapy or puberty blockers for children. And this was significant for a few reasons. One being that although plenty of federal courts have blocked laws like this in states, Florida was the first state to push for gender-affirming care restrictions for trans adults in this way.
Right.
And this ruling is also unique because it blocks restrictions that were passed through the state house, through law, and also through the state's medical boards. And another reason this was as significant is U.S. District Judge Robert Hinkle's order really strongly admonished the state for trying to regulate this healthcare based on what he described as anti-transgender animus instead of medical standards. This was 100 pages of kind of just really getting into the state for taking this action.
And as a lot of legislative sessions are wrapping up in many states, is this something that you're consistently tracking? What else are you tracking, and how does this compare to last year's session?
Thank you. So the through line is this year, more anti-LGBTQ bills failed to pass than last year in 2023. LGBTQ advocates in state houses felt a real reprieve this year. And especially in southern states like Florida, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Georgia, 0 of these bills passed compared to last year and prior years when they were passing extreme legislation. And when I say extreme, I mean the legislation that was the blueprint for other states, like in Kentucky and Florida. They didn't pass anything this year. And right now, North Carolina and Virginia are the only southern states still in session. Midwest states are out of their legislative sessions. And so far this year, only 39 bills passed into law per the ACLU, and over 300 anti-LGBTQ bills did not make it, which is a lot. Some of the states that are still active to watch, Arizona and Louisiana, bills are still advancing there. And New Hampshire, closer to y'all, which has a Republican governor, has actually proposed a lot of anti-LGBTQ bills this year. So that's a state near y'all to keep an eye on.
And so because it's pretty significant, the numbers differences compare from this year to last year, is that surprising to you?
Yes. So when I spoke with the state level advocates who are in these state houses like every day, trying to lobby with lawmakers, like the people who do this work every day, In a couple states, they told me they were surprised that no bills failed to pass. And in a couple of these states, it was really down to the wire, like midnight on the last day of session. Advocates realized, like, oh, nothing's going to pass. So they were surprised among them. However, there's different views on how optimistic to be about this, because one argument was that maybe a state like Kentucky didn't pass as many bills because they already achieved a lot of their goals in passing anti-LGBTQ laws. But then, a response to that is like, well, they were still trying to do this and they still failed. And in Kansas specifically was an interesting case for me, because in that state, 2 state House Republicans flipped their support on banning gender affirming care once they realized the broad effect it would have on care for kids in the state.
And so, with your coverage on policies, you're also focusing on how bans that already went through are bearing out or meeting challenges. So, can you talk about, some of those challenges that you're keeping track of?
Yeah, so, at this point across the South, every state except Virginia bans gender affirming care for trans youth. And, the part of the reason why these bills are able to make it in the South is a lot of southern states have Republican trifectas or Republican majorities in their state houses. And states in the Midwest have also passed a lot of these bills. But across the South, there's basically a wall of this coverage being banned. And similar to what you see whenever a state restricts or bans abortion, people have to travel out of state if they can to get care. They have to find clinics wherever they can get them. And so that can mean traveling, which a lot of families can't afford to do. But what I'm watching is how advocacy groups are trying to support these families. The Campaign for Southern Equality has a grant for them. And then there's a company, a nonprofit called Elevated Access that hires volunteer. They get volunteer pilots to fly people to gender affirming care. So basically what I'm watching now is like all these states in the South have passed these laws. How are trans people still able to get the care they need?
And, from earlier, you mentioned with the numbers and also how, this year compared to last year is a little bit milder, I think. And we know that 2023 was a record year with more than a dozen states passing laws to restrict the gender affirming healthcare for young people that you've been sharing. But there's also a record number of laws passed that would protect that same healthcare. So what can you tell us about the latter of efforts when it comes to protecting that healthcare, especially for younger people?
Yeah, exactly. So 23 states and Washington, D.C. explicitly prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. A lot of those laws already existed prior to the past couple of years, but the new laws that we've seen, laws that were all passed from 2022 to this year, these new laws are shield laws that, aim to protect access to gender affirming care. And then, so 13 states and DC have passed that laws, and then 2 other states have executive orders that do that. And Maine and Maryland are the latest states who took that action. So yeah, that's in the past couple of years. A lot of states have stepped up to say we want to shield gender affirming care, and then some states say like they want to be a refuge for trans and gender affirming care, for trans people and gender affirming care. The other side of that is, also like how we can see with state abortion access, it can be easy for gender affirming care clinics and hospitals that provide this kind of care to get overwhelmed whenever people come out of state to get this care. So that's the other side of that, is like, obviously these are protections and people will go to them because they're available and they're going to help people, but it can also like overload
Right.
the clinics that exist.
Well, and then on talking about protections, we also know that the Biden administration recently enacted federal protections for LGBTQ Americans in the healthcare setting as well. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so that was a development folks have been waiting for a while. It was um, it was regulation that undoes rulemaking under the Trump administration that excluded transgender people from non-discrimination protections in the Affordable Care Act. And this is something the Biden administration had been finalizing for a couple of years. Advocates were getting impatient. We've wanted this for a while. And because the administration said in 2021 that it would interpret Supreme Court precedent to broaden these non-discrimination protections under the ACA. So they made it clear early, like, we just interpret the ACA this way. But what happened in April is that the protections were finalized, which means they have to go through like a formal process in the Federal Register. But basically the new rules prohibit discrimination by doctors, Medicaid, and health insurance for LGBTQ people.
And I know you talked about this a little bit earlier to keep an eye on what's happening in New Hampshire, our neighbor state. But how do you see Connecticut or New England in general in this larger conversation? Are there any specific policies or proposals you might note, or is it how comparable is it with what's happening in other states in terms of Connecticut?
Right. So for y'all's neighborhood in New England, New Hampshire was the state that really stood out as I mean, Rhode Island also proposed bills to ban school sports participation and gender affirming care bans. And those bills in Rhode Island are still advancing, but they have a Democratic governor. And when you have a Democratic governor, you can expect a veto on these bills. New Hampshire is unique in y'all's neck of the woods because they have a Republican governor. And so, those bills have a potential to pass if they got through the state house.
Right.
For Connecticut, Connecticut is one of the states that I believe has a shield law. Yes, yeah, Connecticut passed a shield law in 2022, and the shield law refers to a bill to protect gender affirming care. So that's something y'all did pretty early on in 2022.
Right, and we've got about a minute left here, but we'd love to get some final thoughts from you, as you continue to cover this. Anything top of mind that you would hope our listeners can take from this conversation today?
Yeah, for something that stood out to me in my reporting is that trans Americans right now are experiencing a lot of fear due to the political rhetoric that has just really increased over the past couple of years. Like, Data for Progress polling shows that trans Americans are afraid of holding hands in public, using a public bathroom, getting a new doctor. Like, trans people are afraid right now, but from what state level LGBTQ advocates are saying, like, they are seeing a reprieve. And so I hope that can maybe speak to the fear that trans Americans are feeling, is that not as many bills passed this year.
You've been listening to Orion Rummler, who's a LGBTQ plus reporter for the 19th. Thank you so much, Orion, for being with us this morning.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I really appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate your time as well. And coming up next, we'll discuss the importance of LGBTQ community centers, particularly in light of some of the recent policies we've just been discussing with Orion. And for our listeners, let us know if you want to see a Pride Center where you live. Let us know. 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live.
Good morning. My name is Meg Fitzgerald and Port.
This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Connecticut has LGBTQ community centers in New Haven, Norwalk, and most recently, Bridgeport. In a moment, we'll hear from a researcher looking into the links between these spaces and improved mental health outcomes. But first, joining me now is Juancarlos Soto, who's the executive director of the New Haven Pride Center. Juancarlos, thank you so much for joining us today.
Good morning, Erica. Thank you for having me.
And listeners, let us know if you want to see a Pride Center around where you live. Give us a call, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So, JC, first, can you tell us about the Pride Center's recent move? We mentioned earlier that you guys had this big move earlier this year. How has that been like?
Yeah, it's been incredible. Previously we had been operating in a basement of this really big nondescript building. So we have moved now above ground to a very beautiful location on 50 Orange Street. We have quadrupled our size, which has allowed us to increase our programming and our offerings to the community. And one of the most exciting things to see is that now we are so visible and our windows are so big and we have rainbow flags and pride flags everywhere. Is when people walk by the building and look in and see the windows, they just have these biggest smiles on their face. And then they dash around and come into the center and come in and just enjoy either our library, or we have hundreds of LGBTQ books, or find out about the different programming, something that our previous location did not allow us to see, because
Right.
if you didn't specifically were going to the center, you couldn't like just happen to find it by chance, but now you can.
And so, with that visibility and the resources that's now available, what has the public responses been like? I know you just mentioned that people are dashing in, but how has it been
Yeah,
like in general?
it has been incredible too. We live in New Haven is such a welcoming and amazing community, and we have gotten a lot of support. I think visibility has also allowed us to partner with different organizations that we had not in the past, because we're with that visibility comes just the ability to do more things, right? And also the space itself allows us to do much more. Previously, we had about a room that was, I think, about 200 square feet big for community programming,
Wow.
and now we have quadrupled that space. So it has allowed us to do a lot of different partnerships with organizations that we didn't think we would ever do partnerships with, and um, places where our community can go to. I think one of our biggest things that we want to do at the center is sort of be a bridge for our community and highlight other organizations that are safe and welcoming of LGBTQ people. And that has all happened because of this amazing, beautiful new space.
Well, and I know you just talked about having hundreds of books there, which is something I'm super into. But can you talk about also, what kind of resources are available now that having that bigger space can offer now?
Yeah, so we previously had a pantry shelf, is what we used to call it. It was a one sort of one of those like shelves that you can get at IKEA, with a couple of pieces of food that we were offering to people. And now we've increased to a full pantry. We feed about 100 households a month.
Wow.
So that has come to happen because of the new space. Our community closet has increased dramatically. We are able to provide more clothing. And one of the cool things that we were just able to do was provide dresses and suits for young folks who were going to a prom who couldn't afford it. So that's been incredible to provide. We also provide basic toiletries for hygiene and care. We provide menstrual cycle products. We also have gotten donations of household items, things that we often take for granted, like pots and pans and dishes. And because we have a bigger space, now we can fit all of that within the center. Other than that, we also have been able to increase the affinity spaces. So affinity spaces are groups where people can come together and build community, to just talk to people that are just like you, to have conversations, to do activities. And because of the bigger space, we have been able to increase the number of groups that we have, because we can have more than one group running at a time, which is really nice. And there's a lot of cross pollination of those groups. So we're building this really cool ecosystem of community. And now been able to do monthly community dinners, and just we're planning to do some movie nights coming up. We just got our projector yesterday, so we're really excited about that. And we've also been able to have a full office space specifically for LGBTQ youth. So our new space allows our LGBTQ youth space to be this beautiful big office that is within the center, obviously, but it's sort of separated and has these working stations for young people. So if they want to come in after school and have a little cubicle where they can do their homework or just read a book or just talk to friends, they can do it in these little cubicles, and it provides that safety and sort of just gorgeous space for them to do all those things.
Well, I mean, it sounds like it's a very warm and fuzzy place to hang out, and I'm really glad that you mentioned the monthly community dinners, because Connecticut Public season teams actually recently attended one of those dinners, and they spoke with attendees about the sense of community that they get from gathering for a meal there at the Pride Center's new space. So this episode airs on June 20th, so keep an ear out for it. But here is a quick preview.
I like the sense of community, and it's like a safe space for me since I have like rough things at home. It also is a nice space where I'm not judged as a queer person, and I found like all my friends here in a sense of like comfort and safety, and like it's almost like home to me.
Over 10 years, I've watched it go from an more adult-centric group to being more ready for families and younger queer kids, because they need a place too.
I think it's special that they're intergenerational. Also, just being able to see LGBTQ elders is not something that happens frequently. There's that visibility aspect of being able to see LGBTQ elders and adults who are living their lives and have been through these similar struggles, or have like transitioned later in life, or just really have that knowledge that they can share with young people. I definitely think it's a really integral part of why New Haven matters to me, and just like the intentional curation of affinity space for LGBTQ people and also youth in this city. So I'm really grateful that the Pride Center is here, and really a beacon of light for our community, and to see it grow, not only in budget but in staff and in space and capacity. So I'm happy for them, and I'm happy for what it brings to us.
So you were hearing from Orion Arena, Simon Garcia, and Adrian Huck. And again, tune in to Seasoned on Thursday, June 20th, to hear more of the organizers and participants of the Pride Center's monthly community dinner talk. So, Juancarlos, what's your response to what you just heard? So much energy just in those couple of bites there.
Yeah, and that's the first time I hear those.
Oh.
So I'm trying to hold back.
Don't hold back. Let it all out.
It's great to see that our intentionality is connecting with individuals. When I took over, so I've been the executive director since September, so soon to be a year. One of the things that when I took over fully, and I sat down with the team and we talked about like, what do we want to do? Where do we want to move the center? We're about to move into this new space. What are the things that we want to do? And one of the things that we said is we want to really become a community center. We want us to put our roots down and return to the vision that the New Haven Pride Center had 27 years ago when it started. And we carry this mantra in our hearts of rooted in pride, united in community, right? And that's really what we've wanted to do. So it's good to hear that it's connecting with people and that people are seeing and people can see like what we wanted to do. Because one of the things that we're doing, you heard folks talk about it, but we want to make sure that we have intergenerational programming, that we have older folks and younger folks and everybody in between talking to each other. Because one of the things that is happening is there is an epidemic of loneliness in our community. People
Right.
feel really alone. When these many laws are sort of passed all over the country, we often don't think about the impact that it has on folks that live in our state, because Connecticut is a safe state, right? As we often think. But people are getting these messages all of the time in the news, on social media. So it creates this sort of feeling of you being alone. And So connecting generations allows us to fight back against that feeling. But also, one of the populations that we often forget about when we have these conversations is aging population. One of the things that I hear a lot is that older LGBTQ adults often go back into the closet because if they have to go to an assisted living care facility and things like that, they're not sure if that environment is safe for them to be openly and authentically live their lives, right? So they often go back into the closet. But having these curated spaces that we create in the center allows them to just come in and be themselves, and that generational knowledge sharing that happens is something that helps both aging population adults and also young folks. And we are trying to create, to be honest with you, we're trying to create the spaces that we wish we had growing up, right, and that we hope to have when we get when we're older, right? And that's how we think about all of the programming and everything that we do at the center.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. It sounds like you are definitely on your way in creating that space for many. And loneliness is certainly a topic that we've been talking about here and will be continuing as well. You've been listening to Juancarlos Soto, who will be staying with us. Coming up, we continue our talk about the importance of the resources offered by many of these community hubs. And let us know if you want to see a Pride Center around where you live. Give us a call, 888-720-9677, or leave us a comment on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. We still have Juancarlos Soto on the line, who's the executive director of New Haven's recently expanded Pride Center. And also joining me now is Dr. Dani Chiaramonte, who's an associate research scientist at the Yale LGBTQ Mental Health Initiative. Dani, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I want to get right to your research. Can you first tell us about the survey that you helped conduct of LGBTQ community centers in the U.S. and what did you find there?
Yeah, so this survey was a partnership with an organization called Centerlink. So Centerlink is this national organizing hub of LGBT centers in the country. They have over 350 members, including New Haven Pride Center, and hopefully some of these new ones that are going to be popping up. And about 40% of them offer mental health services. And so we were sort of stalled in 2020. We did a little survey to see if these centers were interested in additional training in terms of mental health approaches, in terms of getting additional mental health services. And we found that, 83% of respondents said their staff would benefit from this training, and 100% were interested in providing additional support. And so what's really important about this is we don't have a lot of evidence-based mental health treatment right now. And so it's really important that we are training new providers to be able to provide mental health services in these spaces that are so safe and so valid and so special to many queer people in their communities.
And this feels like a very obvious question in terms of why these centers would be good for mental health and emotional well-being. But what did you find specifically to that in terms of these spaces being a place that can help improve mental health and emotional well-being?
Yeah, a recent review out of Harvard reviewed nearly 100 studies who are looking at this association between LGBT community supports and health and mental health outcomes. And so in addition to laws and policies being associated with good mental health outcomes, we found that, GSAs, gay straight alliances, employment protections, and these kinds of community supports are really associated with good mental health outcomes. One thing that's important to mention too is I was part of the team that developed that first statewide LGBTQ needs assessment in 2021, which I believe you all reported on. And one of the key findings was that LGBT people in Connecticut were still reporting many negative experiences with their providers, and they felt that their providers lacked training. 15% of respondents were straight up refused services because of their identity when trying to access mental health services, particularly for trans and non-binary respondents. So that's why many queer people really look to their LGBTQ center for mental health services, for referrals, because they are that trusted space. So a therapist might say that they're affirming on their Psychology Today profile, but being associated with a center like the New Haven Pride Center, having a referral straight from there carries a lot more weight because they have that built trust in the community already.
And I think from your research too, you observed a lot of these processes or whatnots that often happen despite short resources and staff these centers are working with. Can you touch
Mhm.
on that trend? Is that something that's still consistent, or are there more resources than staff now? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think it's important to think about the history of LGBT centers. A lot of them, arose during the HIV epidemic, and they were formerly, gay men's health crisis centers or
Right,
HIV crisis centers.
right.
And so a lot of them have shifted over time, as we kind of heard JC talking about, into building larger LGBT community centers. But I would say across the nation and in Connecticut specifically, there's still quite a dearth of the type of support that we really need. These spaces often have very long wait lists for getting mental health services in particular. Of the 350 LGBT centers, part of Centerlink in the country, only about 40% offer mental health services. So there's still quite a bit of work to be done, and many of them have really high client loads and are really overworked and don't have a lot of funding.
So, JC, I wanna ask too, because we know that there are efforts to launch a queer hub in West Hartford, and that would
Mhm.
mean Connecticut's greater capital area will have an LGBTQ community center. And we also got a call from Autumn calling from Newington, who said they'd really like to see a Pride Center in Newington. And this was the first year at our town hall they raised a pride flag. Having some sort of safe
Mhm.
place in Hartford County would make a huge difference. Well, thank you so much,
Yeah.
Autumn, for calling us. So, JC, I want to ask, especially based on what Danny just said, does that information track with you in terms of resources and staff and the mental health connect connection with these centers? And also, what else would you like to see here in Connecticut?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see it at the center often. It's something that we ourselves are working on to try to be able to provide in-house therapy and more mental support because the need is vast, and we are to the best of our ability trying to connect folks. Uh, and mental health care is not cheap. It's very expensive. It's hard for folks to connect to it. And there is a great need. We are lucky to be that we are in New Haven. We have gotten a lot of support from our city and from the different departments in the city to be able to provide these mental health support for individuals. I think what I would love to see, honestly, is more community centers. I think one of the things that we say at the center is like we're really good at doing the work in New Haven because we know New Haven really well, right?
Mm-hmm.
The
Right.
environment in each city is different, and you need folks from that community to establish their own community center because they understand the needs of their community best. So I would love to see, the state of Connecticut uh, invest more in getting some of those centers up and running so that those communities can serve their communities better. And I think, I'm one of those people that think the more the better, right?
Right.
The more we have, the better we're able to provide these services to individuals because the need, like Dani was saying, it's vast. And we centers are trying to make magic with the little bit of funding that we receive. Uh, Fundraising is really tough because we have to wear many hats. And most of the time, like for example, the staff at the center were 5 individuals trying to do many things.
Right.
Um, so that's what I would like to see.
And Danny, with your research, can you talk about the broader state of research into the LGBTQ community and also the holes that this research could fill?
Absolutely. And I think this ties into Juancarlos's point as well. I think there's sometimes this notion that, researchers can sort of study whatever they want, but in reality, just like, an organization has funding concerns, we're still tied to funding as well.
Sure.
In terms of, National Institute of Health, for example, funds a lot of our work, and that's very tied to the political climate. So again, historically, a lot of the funding for LGBT research was about pathologizing queerness, with the onset of conversion therapy, which is fortunately in our state and many other states been deemed unethical and harmful. And then the HIV epidemic opened up several lines of funding that we still see today in many of these centers and in a lot of research. But the truth of the matter is that there's just not a lot of funding that's specifically about the health and well-being of LGBT people. They may study mental health, but the primary outcome is still HIV or substance use, and that tends to focus mostly on gay and cisgender men and trans women, which leaves out several notable subgroups of the LGBT community. And so a lot of this is very new. There's some new great approaches coming out at our initiative. We're studying LGBT affirmative cognitive behavioral therapy and trying to implement trainings and test models to see what works for queer people in therapy and how we can better equip therapists to be able to provide this approach, and how we can equip centers to be able to have the support and resources and sustainable models to implement these affirmative approaches. But like I said, it's all very new. There's some great work coming out of Canada for trans and non-binary youth, and some cool trainings happening out of the VA. But this is all kind of a new area because there has not been a lot of funding for it until pretty recently.
And I know
Dani, and I don't. Oops, sorry.
No, go for it, JC.
Dani, I don't know if you saw this in your research, but one of the things that we are seeing too, and I think like to just sort of highlight why it's important to fund not only the centers but also the research. It's because like we are seeing, for example, at the center, we're seeing families from other states that are not friendly to LGBTQ families literally flee those states and come to Connecticut. And we at the center, for example, to the best of our ability, are trying to help these families sort of relocate and find services and find things like housing. And we already know that LGBTQ people, even in our state, are more likely to experience houselessness, food insecurity. It's harder for folks to find jobs who are LGBTQ, even in our state. So then when you add, I think, another layer of folks who are fleeing to the state, it's even, there's another layer of complication that we're like trying to figure out, and it's happening. And I suspect that as these more laws pass throughout the country, like these numbers are going to increase because we have been seeing the numbers rise.
Dani, can you respond to that real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree with that. And we see that as well. These structural issues like housing, food insecurity are usually come before someone is able to, they're a little bit more important than mental health sometimes in people's minds when they're trying to prioritize, their needs. They need food to eat, they need somewhere to live before they can work on their mental health. Right now we're training over 700 providers in LGBT affirmative psychotherapy approaches, and they're from all over the country, some from rural, small LGBT centers out of a little garage with 2 people to these big centers that maybe are out of, Boston or these big kind of cities in New York. And the questions we get, these people who have these very, very, very different challenges because of the political climate in their state, really speak to how important it is for us to be collecting these data to kind of learn what sort of factors are affecting the ability for centers like yours to be able to serve their community appropriately and effectively.
And as we continue this conversation, we've got about 2 minutes left here, but would love to get final thoughts from both of you. Dani, let's start with you. What do you hope our listeners get out from this conversation today?
Well, I really hope the listeners continue to see the impact of research and be thoughtful in what you're taking in and understand the importance of it. If you are a queer person out there, contributing to research is super important. We want to know what works. We want to know how to do better, and participating in those studies is really important for us. but also support your local LGBT center and advocate for more. We need more of them.
In about a minute here, JC, and I know we talked about mental health and community, just scraping the surface of all that, but what else do you hope our listeners can learn from this conversation today?
Yeah, I hope that folks learn that they have a safe and welcoming space at the New Haven Pride Center, 50 Orange Street. Come and visit us, be part of our programming. We have drag bingo tonight. We have a lot of events coming up. And it's really important for us to receive your support, either with your dollars or hours. If you don't have a dollar to give us, come in, volunteer for us, do a food drive for us. Everything helps, but definitely know that you have a welcoming environment and a center with big open arms for you at 50 Orange Street, New Haven, Connecticut. Come and visit us.
Well, thank you so much for that, JC Soto, who's the executive director of the New Haven Pride Center. Appreciate you sharing your experience and your space with us today.
Thank you.
You're also listening to Dr. Dani Chiaramonte, who's an associate research scientist at the Yale LGBTQ Mental Health Initiative. Dani, thank you so much for spending time with us on Where We Live this morning.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Katie Pellico, Meg Dalton, and Robin Doyon-Aiken. Our technical producer is Kat Pastor. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app, and thank you so much for listening.